Good morning from the capital, Kampala. Thank you all for joining us, and we're happy. Thank you, Makerere University, for hosting us. And we're really excited to have all of you here. Good morning, Africa. Good morning, world. In this conversation, we'll be looking at the new players. I'll start the conversation off with just a short story. I've been meeting a couple of people over the last couple of months, and I think the most recent was a team of Germans who came in, and we had lunch and we talked about so many things. After that, I told them, welcome to Uganda, thank you for coming. They're like, but Solomon, Africa is the future. Everyone is looking Africa. And I have had an opportunity of talking to different nationalities. Literally, everyone is focusing Africa. We already have the players who have been with us for quite a while, and we all know them. But Africa is, there are people who are rediscovering Africa in a more passionate way. I'll give you an example. If any one of you has been at the African Union headquarters in Addis, you cannot miss the big screens there from the reception to different offices, and the television station that they're switched on is CGTN, which of course is the international cable network for the Chinese government. If you've been on the streets of Lagos, there are satellite dishes everywhere, and a couple of set-top boxes, yellow in color. We have that same in Uganda. Star Times, right? How many of us have Star Times in our homes? Very many. It's taking over. Makerere University recently introduced a language called Chinese. And the Chinese government is sponsoring different students to take on Chinese. Am I right? Yeah, School of Languages. Every year, there's a team of journalists that is given tours to China and sponsorships every year. Some of them are journalists. Now, if you happen to look at the new vision over the last 2 weeks, you'll not miss an article by one of the Ugandan journalists who is there and speaking good about China and China's involvement on the continent and in Uganda. I can go on and on and on. What that tells you is that there is a deliberate move by new players to have a big footprint in Africa, directly or indirectly. Now, that is not only in media, by the way. There are external powers like Russia, China, Turkey, who look like they're new players because we all know that the people who colonized all of us have been here. The English, the Germans, the Portuguese, they've been here. Looks like many of the African governments are now looking at the East rather than the West. We all know that ringtone by President Museveni when he's praising China. Do we know that? Imagine now it's becoming a ringtone. Am I speaking to someone? Yeah. Where he says, China, oh. They have really been our good friends. There's so many new players. Africa has now become a place where everyone wants to have a bite of it. So what does this mean for us? And is there more than meets the eye? Precisely today, we're having a conversation around that subject. And I would love to make it as easy as I can for all of us to understand and debate and have conversations. And today's topic is strategies and influence of new actors in Africa. And we'll pay particular attention to Russia, China, Turkey, because they're the current big boys. And I thought that we could start this conversation with Dr. Stefan Friedrich, who is the head of Department Sub-Saharan Africa at the CAS headquarters. CAS has particularly done several studies on this subject, and I think their recent release was on how these new players are taking over Africa's media. It's content that you can find on the CAS website, and I had an opportunity of reading part of it. But Dr. Stefan, if you could just ground us in what have been the key findings from the studies that you have conducted, and why is CAS really interested in this topic? Dr. Stefan, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Solomon, and I'm very glad to be part of the Kampala Geopolitics Conference. I heard so much about it, and now it's good to be part of it. Thank you very much. However, actually, I wish to be there in person, so maybe next year. Well, to your question, Solomon, the world is changing. And after the end of the Cold War and the unification of Germany and Europe in 1990, it seemed that the world was developing towards democracy worldwide. More and more countries moved in that direction, and that trend was something that the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung welcomed very much. We are an institution for which the promotion of democracy is a core value. However, this trend towards democratization of the 1990s and 2000s experienced changes over the last 6 to 10 years. And that had lots to do with the re-emergence of Russia, not as a constructive global power, but rather as a disruptive, deconstructive power, seen particularly in the seizure of Crimea in 2014, forcefully changing the borders in Eastern Europe, something that we thought wouldn't happen anymore. The whole involvement of Russian actors in East Ukraine or Russia's involvement in the Syrian civil war and others. And secondly, it is connected to the rise of the People's Republic of China, not only as an economic powerhouse, but more and more as a systemic challenge to the trend of democratization and to Western democracies. China is not a democracy, it is a communist country, and it wants to expand its influence worldwide and wants to reduce the pressure from the outside to move towards democracy by promoting its own system, which is authoritarian and becomes more and more authoritarian day by day. The world now is, that's how we see it, in the middle of a systemic rivalry. Western democracies on the one hand and rising authoritarian countries on the other hand. And one key area for this rivalry is Africa. You mentioned quite a number of elements where this rivalry also unfolds. There are different arenas like economics, IT infrastructure, development aid, media, political parties, military support, corona diplomacy. Particularly on the last 4 areas, we commissioned a series of research papers and studies focusing on China, but sometimes also on other actors like Russia and Turkey. For example, on the media sector, we published a study. It is
question we are supposed to ask ourselves, and comes down to one simple thing, Solomon. It is money, money, money. When we talk about money, it's like everything, you know, when Africans think about money, we just think like money is the solution to everything. But at the same time, you're losing like our values, you're losing our resources in the process. So that is exactly what happened. And yeah, China is busy establishing itself as a global news, you know, they want that presence in Africa, and I think it's there. And also to make it, you know, greater for them, you know, most of their channels are free to air. Like when you go to your StarTimes dish, if all the channels have disappeared and you haven't paid, be sure that CGTN Africa will still be showing on that platform. So that is just what you can see how the agenda they want to push across all platforms. So that is China. And then we have, you know, TRT World, that is the Turkish channel, and now they have actually, last year they came up with the new African program dedicated to Africa. They have 30 minutes of that. It's being presented by a lady from Nigeria, and you can tell now they are very interested. As I had their doctor saying, the Turkish president was also in Africa, just doing his you know, visit, but also behind that, you know, just to say, you know, we are supporting, we have this, and you can imagine how that was being broadcasted to the people in Turkey through TRT World. We also even have India with the Z Network. You know, we've seen how they are now hiring anchors from Africa to go talk to the Indians over there, to go tell them more about Africa. We have Russia's RT. So we can see the emergence of these new actors, who I know the doctor is saying, are they really new actors? They're not new actors in terms of maybe investment and other fields, but in the media field, we consider them here in Africa as new actors because we're used to the BBC, we're used to the CNN, we're used to the New York Times. But I can still say BBC is still unmatched. The old dog BBC is still unmatched because most of our journalistic training, the rules and everything we have learned from Western media. So there's that still strong presence of the BBC, the CNN, and people trusting the stories that they're putting out there on the continent. Also, another thing that might be that clashes with so many journalists is there has been this story out there where people say China paints a positive picture on TV, on mainstream media, when it comes to Africa. Well, the likes of BBC, the likes of CNN, the likes of France 24 tend to, especially during elections, tend to paint that negative side when it comes. So there's still that, you know, that back and forth, people trying to establish who's saying the truth, how does it need to be done, do we need to hide a bit, like, you know, when you're reporting for this, maybe the Chinese media stations, or do we need to go out there and say what is on the ground, really what is happening to other Africans, you know, when you see there on the BBC, when you see there on the CNN. So it's quite a topic, I must say, Solomon, quite a topic. And but most of the time, what I can say, when I was at CGTN, what we broadcasted is definitely the achievements of the Chinese government back home in China and their work in Africa. There was no highlighting of issues like racism or workers' rights and all that. So a bit of fairness, public accountability, that is independence, was kind of out the door.
And Sean, we've seen journalists from all over Africa being given scholarships to go to China. You want to comment on that? Is it also happening in Kenya?
Yes. Once you get there, there's always a training that you go to Beijing. You get to go to the main big offices there and see. And you know, when it comes to China, the technology and the money is real. So even when you go to Beijing, you actually get shocked. It's something you've never seen before when growing up in Africa. But then you get to see that, and you get to be like, well, maybe they're working for the continent. But the truth is, not everything is reported out there. There's an agenda, and you have to follow that agenda. If you try to do it your own way as a journalist, I'm sorry, just get ready to be fired. But yes, there are many journalists year in, year out. Let me say like dozens, like 50 or 60 each year, who have to be flown to Beijing to be trained. You know, if it's print, if it's radio, if it's TV, they're always there.
Thank you, Sean. We'll come back to you, including, by the way, Uganda here. And we've seen so many journalists being taken to China literally all the time. And can I say I was one of them, by the way? I was one of them. And this goes to my next question, because when I went the Chinese government sponsored my trip to go and cover the CPC, Communist Party of China, often has the annual the China Africa, part of the China Africa Convention. They get political parties who are in power in Africa and bring them, and they have conversation with the Communist Party of China in a 5-day whole convention where they commit to support governments in power. And at that moment, of course, it was the National Resistance Movement Party that went to represent government. And I covered the whole event, and they committed huge sums of money. And that means that they become part of the establishment. They become part of, of the regime. We know that the Communist Party of China has supported the National Resistance Movement Party here in Uganda, even during the elections. That one, I know that I have evidence to that it has really been behind big support to the National Resistance Movement Party. And I just wanted to, to bring back the conversation to whether indeed is it the development agenda that authoritarian regimes are pushing for, or is there more than meets the eye? And I want to bring in, I think, Raymond, I should bring you in before we go back virtual. Is there more than meets the eye in this? Raymond, we have seen huge investments, for example, of China, and Uganda's debt burden, and indeed Africa's debt burden, has significantly grown. They are pushing that we are interested in the development of the country. We are interested in infrastructure development. We're interested in pushing you out, and perhaps that's why the African leaders are falling for that bait, and yet they may be more than meets the eye, Raymond.
Solomon, I wanted to say from the onset that it's a dangerous intellectual voyage to imagine that there's nothing more than there's no more than meets the eye. It's truly dangerous. And one of the quickest ways, as an example, to show you this, we have an election that's going to happen in Kenya in the next year. And one of the key factors in that election is the debt burden contracted by the development agenda of Kenya. And that majority of that debt burden is actually caused by the Chinese government lending towards the Kenyan government. Yeah. Now, we have to ask ourselves, and again, this is a matter of control of the African elite. I hear many people saying China is the biggest lender to Africa. China is not even the third biggest lender to Africa. There's a lot of multilateral aid that allows African countries to operate without control that comes from the European Union, France, Germany here. There's a lot of aid that comes to Africa from countries like India, which is in health forms and the like. But the aid that specifically comes from China is very pegged and very tagged. Even the idea of we are innocent businessmen, we are your friends trying to do business. No, there's nothing. We are not friends. We're not trying to do any business with each other. China is taking sand from Uganda at very low cost, taking it to China and manufacturing tiles from there. China is leading in capital flight from Africa, just as are many multinational companies doing here. So there's more than meets the eye. There is, of course, like I told you, a general consensus that there must be a control of Africa because it's the next barrier of development. These economies that we treasure, the European Union economies, the United States economy, the Chinese economy, they've reached what you call satiety point. They can't grow any further. So their only growth is outward. So they have to come towards Africa for them to realize some level of growth and development. And this is where I'm particularly angry with Dr. Philip, because one of the questions he asked was, where is the African agency? But the African agency is these universities. This is where the African agency was trained from. Down the road there is a hall called Nkrumah. That hall isn't called Nkrumah because Nkrumah was the president of Ghana. It's called Nkrumah because he had the consciousness of Africanness with him. And that consciousness has progressively died in our universities, and it's being progressively killed even by the elites in these universities. Some of them were lecturers. So we've got to ask ourselves important questions. The first and more important question is, do we want authoritarian states in Africa? And I think that the answer is no, because we've lived under the yoke of authoritarianism in Africa for years. people get butchered, personal freedoms get taken away, control of mass media, control of the economy, large-scale corruption, tribalism. All those are effects that come with authoritarianism. On the other hand, there's this thing called democracy. It's not perfect, but it guarantees that a lot of people take part in the affairs of their government. And the more that you have more people take part in the affairs of their government, then you tame a level of consciousness within those people. And that is where we need to have a conversation. The conversation on how can we redefine democracy in Africa to work for Africa, yes, whilst in the same manner, rejecting all this new level for authoritarianism that's coming up. Solomon, the other thing that I want to talk about is I had someone on the panel mention that there's soft power that these authoritarian regimes are coming with. I had to break it to you. They have hard power too. The guns that you see the Uganda police force having on the streets, those are AK-47s manufactured in Russia, paid for by the Chinese government. The coup d'etats that you're seeing, they are being emboldened. The people carrying out coup d'etats are being emboldened by authoritarian regimes. They are providing them intelligence on political opponents. They are providing them with weapons with which to kill their opponents. They are providing them with intelligence on how to kill their own democracies. They're providing them with even worksmiths. Huawei Technologies has been involved in a lot of hacking allegations in African elections. Who is the owner of Huawei? The Chinese government. Who sits on the boards of the Huawei company? People who sit in the CPC who make decisions for the Chinese government. So there's nothing like soft power. And actually, there's actual hard, raw power. And it is seen. It's just that we don't have the platforms within which to take over African consciousness in a way that we elaborate these things. And for me, the quickest answer to African agency is the people in this room. You have people who are in this room interested in this conversation, and after this conversation, they'll have conversations with other people. Yeah. And once those conversations continue to happen, you have a growth of African consciousness.
I love what you're saying. Raymond Mujuni, thank you. While you were speaking, you know, I as an investigative journalist, I've discovered that there are conversations going on for the Chinese government to take over Entebbe International Airport, the cargo area. Why? Because we're heavily indebted. That one I can speak with authority that it's happening. These conversations are going on. The Minister of Finance is having conversations. The Minister of Finance is trying to convince the Chinese government to take over, you know, traffic. And they have put their foot down that they want to take over cargo. And that is deep. But at what cost? The people in this government of Uganda think if we do the Entebbe Expressway, people will use the road and we will pay for it and we'll have the infrastructure there. Whilst we have to pay the loan, but it is there and we are developing, it will help the economy to grow. It will help our manufacturing sector. If we improve infrastructure, then the development will continue. Let me come to Dr. Stephen. You talked about this as being disruptive and destructive, to say the least, when you're giving your remarks. I wanted you to expound on that, because there are two parts of the coins, Dr. Stephen, here. Development versus authoritarianism. Your thoughts?
Thank you very much, Solomon. Before answering that question, I really would like to comment on what the other panelists said. I really want to say that I very much agree with Raymond in terms of what he said about soft power and hard power. And hard power doesn't come with soldiers anymore. Hard power comes with economic pressure or economic power. And I think it's very important to underline this. And the Chinese do have the power in their hand currently. And also to Sean, when you mentioned about working for the Chinese CGTN, I mean, if you have to throw all your principles out of the window, journalistic principles, that's a tough sell. I mean, and that is what I meant with they are influencing and they are pressuring journalists and so on, and that is something that goes contrary to what we see as democratic development. And I also have to comment on what Dr. Phillips said, and I think especially in a university context, I can't let that stand there. If you argue that China is a democracy and Russia is a democracy, well, I lived 6 years altogether as a student and later as a representative of the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung. I lived in Shanghai and in China. And I know that it is not a democracy. They do, I grant it, they do have local elections, but the question is, who are you allowed to elect, and are these free and fair elections? And I have to say no. And the same holds true for Russia at the moment. And I mean, they do have elections, but if you really follow how these elections are conducted and how opposition parties, and let's take only the case of the opposition person Navalny, how they are treated. I mean, to talk about Russia as a true democracy, well, I do have serious doubts about it, and I think this is well, if we start discussing or arguing about whether China is a democracy or not, then we already have gone a long way. And maybe that's also one success of China telling its own narrative, because it is the Chinese narrative that they call themselves a democracy, but not according to our standards. Maybe we are not in a position to set the standards, but it is something that where we have a quite clear definition what a true democracy is, and China certainly is not that. And there I come to the question of destructiveness. I mean, it is, I mean, if you look at the situation now, for example, very current situation, the stress that Europe has at the Belarusian border at the moment. You certainly heard that there are lots of refugees from the Middle East that are trying to enter Poland, to cross the border of Poland from Belarus. And how does that happen? How do these people get to Belarus? They are flown in from Syria, from Iraq, from Iran, over Turkey to Minsk, and then they are brought by government troops or government soldiers. They are accompanied to the European border, and the reason for this is that that they want to destabilize the European Union by pushing more and more refugees to the European border and make trouble for the European Union. And I do not believe, it's my personal opinion, but I do not believe that this is being done on the will of only President Lukashenko of Belarus. It must be with the support and the approval by Kremlin and by President Putin. And this is something what I call destructive, because it is just an essay to try to destabilize the European Union. And this is something which is an example which is not related to Africa, but the point is that, that these kind of actions we meet everywhere, and not only in Europe, but also elsewhere in the world.
Can I just come in here, Dr. Stefan? When you look at, and you're talking about destructive here, when you look at the money that comes from the so-called authoritarian regimes, and that's including China and Russia, it doesn't have a lot of, a lot of attachments, and very many international, very many African presidents and governments have embraced that sort of funding, as opposed to the funding that often comes from the EU, the Germans and the British and the Americans. And because of the past and the way the West has treated several African governments, pretty much by dictating on them what and how they should run their governments, vis-a-vis the East, and that's Russia, China, and Turkey in this case, that say, you know what, we're not interested in the way you govern your people, we're interested in your development, and the money that we're giving you, use it well to develop your people. Of course, some of it is grants, some of it is loans, and somewhat, most of the African government have fallen for this money and for this relationship, and they're focusing their attention away from the West, and they're closely eyeing the East, and therefore bringing them closer. And this is why our head of state has used international platforms before during big national events to say, those guys are the worst people in the world, and then applauding the East. This is where it is coming from, Do you want to say something about that?
I totally agree, and you are absolutely right. This is a huge challenge also for Western development aid. Chinese development aid very often emphasizes on large-scale infrastructure development. We mentioned in the debate already the AU headquarters or government buildings in Uganda. Or the railway between Nairobi and Mombasa. Very often it closes a gap which is also caused by Western donors' focus on poverty reduction, education, and health. And China's economic aid is mainly in the form of cheap loans, usually without open, and I have to underline this, open conditionalities. And it does not ask questions about democracy and human rights, and that's for some leaders, this is very appealing. But to be sure, China's economic aid comes also with conditionalities. And you have to accept, for example, China's claim that Taiwan is part of the PRC, or you are forced or invited to vote with China in multilateral fora such as the UN. And here you will see that there are quite a few strings attached also to the Chinese development aid. But it's not as open and transparent as the strings attached that come with Western aid. And what the West is trying to do is to help to improve the livelihood of the people on the ground in these countries. And the Chinese, in their development aid, that is not, to put it this way, that is not their first priority.
Dr. Stephen, thank you. I'm going to open the floor up to some views and context from people. And Sean, I'll come back to you in just a while. but I thought I could hear from people online and people in the room. I'm going to give an opportunity to you, mention your name, but also make your comment or question as brief as you can to get more people to speak back, but also have time for my panel to give closing remarks. All right.
Thank you very much, Solomon. My name is James Okol. I am the Youth Councillor of Kwania District here in Uganda. I want to start by saying where there are desperate people, that those people who emerge to come and solve the solution. Africa has, over time, people have been seeing it as it is lagging behind. And when the Europe, the Western, tried to give us their funds and attaching the string, the Chinese and the East thought they could come and give the solution. And that is why we are seeing their footprint in Africa. But to what we don't know, that every other person who has interest in your land has got another hidden agenda. I would use a proverb that all of them may be putting on the same face, but all of them have the same character. I am sure that the Chinese were once dominated by the whites, and today they want to show the whites that they can overpower them by, one, handling Africa, since there is that trajectory report that by 2100, Africa will be the habitant of all the world. So they want to be the first people here so that, you know, they could be the champion. Thank you.
Thank you. One and the same. Dr. Poli, I think you'll say something on that. All right, I'll get a lady. Okay, I have Stone there. Stone, I can see you. Yes, Stone.
Thank you very much, Solomon, and good morning to everyone. Actually, good afternoon. I think mine is in somewhat agreement with Dr. Apoli that when we lack conversations about the sense of African agency, we will have a conversation about newcomers on the continent. We talk about CGTN, we talk about RT. But who is telling the African story? That if we have failed to build the headquarters of the so-called African Union, I can't actually bring myself to understand how that was possible. That $200 million had to come from China, so that we lack a sense of agency. Maybe that blunts our ability to even have conversations like this. I find this conversation a bit problematic in a sense that I wish there was a representative from the Chinese government here. That oftentimes when the conversation comes up, I ask myself, are we mirroring how, say, Germany or the United States would love us to interact with China? That way we are being dictated, or there's a dictation of how do you perceive China? Because what is China doing that the CIA hasn't done? What is China doing that the British soldiers in Nanyuki in Kenya haven't done? Or is it that when the Chinese do it, we expect the headline to be bigger, but somehow we have been either demotivated to assume that if it is done by, say, Americans, that if a coup d'etat is inspired by the CIA, somehow that's okay. The BBC, CNN, they got it wrong with the Iraqi war, that American and British forces went to Iraq on the basis of information that was projected around the world on these same channels. So even when we talk about professionalism, is that something we have consumed over the years, that we don't allow ourselves to give that to China? And that's not to say there are no problems with China, but could we open ourselves to the possibility that maybe our definition, our understanding of these people is being dictated by someone else? Thank you.
Wow, interesting perspective to him. All right, I had said the lady, yeah, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Destiny Gladys Chaiga, a member of the Young Professionals Mentorship Program. I think the discussion that I've loved most is about the mindset. I'll give the analogy of a home. All of us belong to a home. And in our homes, we may have things that we don't like and some things that we like. But regardless, that is your home. That is the lineage where you've come from. For the youth, the young people here, We have things that we may not like about our continent, about our country, but that is where God has placed us. It is, the onus falls on us that the aspects that we see that have not been worked on better, how do we, starting from our individuals and from our small circles, how do we shift our mindsets to a mindset of appreciating and being positive about the things that you see, regardless of the other negatives? I believe that what the other countries are doing in terms of Africa is they have identified a gap where most of us may be so negative, maybe because of the prejudice of other people regarding the continent. But in a place where you know your strength, where you appreciate the things that are in your country, you'll be able to move an extra mile to see that the positive things happen. So for the young people who are the leaders of today and also going to occupy those prospective places, offices, the mindset shift starts now, not when you are in those respective places. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm called Vicky Namgobe. I'm a youth leader representing the youth of Sri Lanka to the National Youth Council, and I'm also a Polar Lab Fellow. Now, I wanted to just raise two issues concerning resources and cultures and values vis-a-vis the media sector. Now, the new actors that are coming are really using the media, and initially we as Africans, we have our cultures and values that we really are good to us and known to us. But we are finding that with the exposure, with what media is showing about the new actors, our people, especially the young majority of our youth, are losing their identity and are losing their cultures and values. And there is no information that could be sieved out to help out these youth to gain what is theirs and eradicate what is not theirs. So I wanted to inquire if there is a process or a way forward we can do to safeguard what is ours, to remain what is ours, because it defines our identities in most cases. Now, as I was listening to the panelists, we spoke about a new geopolitical phase where Africa is gaining more importance and becoming a trade partner. But for me, from my point of view, what I see, we are not becoming like trade partners. There is something called like specialization of labor. They are using us, Africa, as a place of where they can get natural resources, extract it, take them, add value on it, and send them back home, and again sell us the same products at a very high price, and we end up getting indebted in loans and other activities. So what is the way forward that we can be able also to gain a same level status where we are not only seen as people that are producers of natural resources and them they are the manufacturers? How do we be able to safeguard whatever is ours? Thank you so much.
All right, I have 15 minutes to go. I'll give just an opportunity to two more people. There's a hand there.
Yes, thank you very much,
him.
Mr. Solomon.
Yeah.
My name is Tumweske Derek Collins, and I'm a youth leader from Chiriandongo district. At the same time, an activist. I happen to be one of the young people that worked with SBC Uganda. That is SBC, the company that is in charge of the Kampala International Airport, immediately when I had graduated from here. I had an interaction with one of them who was heading us in our section, and he happened to be an Israelite. He told me that the reason, and we were discussing about the Chinese dominance and other European countries in Africa. He told me the reason as to why we are being dominated by these Chinese and other Western countries is because we don't believe in ourselves. We Africans, we know, but we don't believe in ourselves. And it goes back to our leaders. You find that the whole president of a country, he cannot offer contracts to the fellow Africans just because they believe we cannot manage. And yet we have experts. Every day Makerere here is producing engineers, but no one, you would find no one is even adding maybe a section in Kampala International Airport. But all the experts who are there, they're Israelis. You go on these roads, the Chinese who are not even educated, but someone is because he's a Chinese, he has been given a section to head. For you find that you have the books, you are an expert in that, but the Chinese is the one handling everything because of our ignorance. That's why I want to agree with Doctor that it is because of our leaders that we have that have caused all what is happening in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I may have to close it up, guys. I'm told Dr. Stefan wants to go. So I'll give you under 30 seconds, you who has the mic, and then we'll close up. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Mr. Robert is my name. And I'm very delighted to talk about this. Yes, we talked about the world becoming open to each other in the geopolitics. But as we are dealing with this important question of investment, my question is, to those that sit at the boards that negotiate for us as we get these investors, one, I believe that Africans, we have the resources, both the natural resource and the human resource. The only thing that we are failing and lacking out is on how to realize how to get the financial resource, which I believe should not be a problem for many years. Now, where my question comes in, it is not the first time that we are getting foreign investors and the so-called multinational companies. But when they come, all the best they have done for us is set up some infrastructure, take the resources to their home countries, and pay the people who are here and not even occupying significant positions, take Africans for cheap labor, and then at the end of it all, they will say, above all, we have the infrastructure. What have we understood? What have we learned from the past investors? And as the board, what have you learned? Why do you even go ahead to negotiate for new actors on the block if there is no difference? Can we learn how to utilize the chances we have as Africans, devise means of gaining our own finances to run our resources because we have the people to place in those positions? Why should we repeat the same mistake over and over again?
All right, thank you. Thank you. 15 seconds.
Thank you. Thank you, Solomon. I'm just going to throw two questions to all your panelists. The first one is going to go to Raymond and Sean. Media thrives on the activities and the service of journalists. Without journalists, there will be no media. Now, they have been talking about how media is biased because of the influence that comes from those that fund media and the influence of the editorial board. My question on that is, at what point is the decision made to agree with the editorial board and not the principles of journalism? And what are the factors that influence that decision? The second question is going to go to Dr. Kasaija and Dr. Stephen. You see, there is a transition from the use of democratic processes to legitimize aristocracy or authoritarianism. Media has been always praised as the fourth arm of the government because of the role it plays in governance. But right now, media, through public relations and bias reporting, is being used to legitimize authoritarianism. My question, therefore, is, what are we not doing, or what should we be doing to counter that? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, we can't continue, but we need to give my panelists a round so that they can respond to some of the issues raised. I'll start with Dr. Stefan. Dr. Stefan, you want to respond to some of the views that have been brought up?
Thank you very much. And to be sure, actually, I have to go. I do not want to go because I find the conversation very inspiring, and I would really love to be with you longer. But there are other appointments that have actually already started. To make one thing clear, I mean to bring together actions of the CIA and things of the Chinese and so on, and mix this. I mean, by no means anybody of us is going to defend actions of the CIA. And if you remember history, it was Germany and the German government which was very much against this Iraq invasion, and there was even a huge split between Europe and the United States on that matter. I mean, the credibility of the United States as a whole suffered a lot from these actions and from I mean, just lately Colin Powell died, and one of his biggest regrets in his life, he mentioned, was that he believed his own CIA and was put on the in the UN Security Council to give this presentation that we all remember. There was a question by one lady, the question, what is the way forward, and how, yeah, what can be done in order to get real advancement? And I mean, for me, it is real development aid. And what do I mean with real development aid? I mean that development aid that is going which is providing resources and profits the common people, and is not just going to corrupt officials, or is hidden in pockets that nobody knows where they are, and that the people of your countries can profit really from the richness of your countries. I mean, of course, but it is very absolutely necessary for that you have accountability and transparency as the money flows and dependencies are concerned. And that is also the reason why sometimes development aid from Western countries are so much harder to get, or take so much longer to be distributed, because if lots of money is going from one hand to another, there has to be accountability and transparency, and the media should have the opportunity to look into that, and people should be taken responsible for accepting the money and how they use this money. And this is, for me, actually the only way to do this. Thank you.
Dr. Stefan Frederick, thank you very much. Let's give him a round of applause before he goes. Thank you very much for your contribution. We really are grateful. He is the director of the Sub-Saharan Africa at the CAS headquarters. Thank you very much for speaking to us. I just want to bring Sean in. Sean Osimbe, a couple of questions came through with the media. You just want to react to those?
Yes. What I would like to say, what we have gotten from this conversation, the biggest actor right now on the African continent is China. So we're talking about Africa's dependency on China. And just a quick history as I wrap up is that China is attracted to Africa because of the natural resources and the export markets. And them being in Africa has been met with skepticism. But come to think of it, the governments have been the government officials have been very, very overwhelmingly positive, but the people on the ground are still doubting. Why are they doubting? Because there's one thing that is lacking in Africa, and that is education. There are no governments that are going out there to tell the people, this is what we are getting from China, and this is what China are getting from us. There's lack of so much information, and this is what is bringing so much doubt when it comes to people trusting the Chinese out here. So and also see what when it comes to exports, as I was talking, the export markets and the natural resources, just quickly, let's talk about Angola, which is one case that is very, very alarming. Since it is estimated that around 75% of the Chinese debt, the total Chinese debt, I think they have the higher Chinese debt in Africa, they secure it back through their oil exports. And that is such a big natural resource. So you can imagine what that does to the Angolan community. And because of the lack of education maybe, or because of how the loans came about, and the government officials, they were just happy, oh, so much money, and they didn't get to think it through. And maybe the media didn't present it to the people over there on what the risk is when taking taking over this money is what has caused all this doubt and all that. So I think to just answer two questions from the lady, what needs to be done, I'll support Dr. Stefan, is the government officials need to take responsibility. People need to get out there and talk to and educate the masses on what exactly is happening with these new, new big players on the continent. Like, what exactly are we getting? It's not that, oh yes, the money is here, but in real sense, most of that money is being corruption is taking over, and we are not even seeing the money get to the systems because maybe China do not have a harsh policy when it comes to accounting for the money. So the education needs to be out there, and as the media, I know it's really tough, and the part, I know that the guy was asking about the media, the journalist values. What happens is that most journalists across Africa, they tend to emulate their counterparts in Europe. And most of these top European mainstream channels have not provided the training. So what China did is they came and saw that gap and actually penetrated into that gap, and that they started taking advantage of, let's go training, but in real sense they know the agenda they're pushing. So for that part, most individuals, when they go there, they feel like maybe they're obliged to continue following the Chinese way of doing things. But at the end of the day, that's not being a true journalist, because when you're a journalist, you need to know that you have to be honest, you have to be fair, you don't have to be biased, you have to tell both sides of the story. So I think that comes down to individuals. You check yourself from inside out and get to see, is this working for my people? Because at the end of the day, you might just be taking the money, you might be attracted to the technology, but you're not seeing what you're doing to the future generations. So I think as an individual point of view, just to ask yourself those questions and take it into account, all these things. And this is what I'm saying, making a breakthrough in this news arena, that is the broadcasting side, it just requires more than a generous package of money and technology. And people just need to think twice about the lives of other Africans. They need the government officials, the journalists, we need to think twice. Right. Is it worth it, or are we drowning further when it comes to this new industry?
Sean, thank you. Sean Simbo, thank you very much for answering some of those questions. Dr. Puli, I would love you to particularly talk back to Songa Samuel, who raised the issues, among others, and our discussions influenced, against China. He raised a couple of issues there. And you want to speak back to some of the views that have been raised, Dr. Poli?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for the questions and the comments. Who is telling the African story? I think this is a very fundamental question that we need to raise. But we need to tell our story. My friend here talks about an Israeli asking him telling him that we don't believe in ourselves. I don't know about you, but me, I believe in myself. I don't know about others. So this whole issue about, we don't believe in ourselves and we cannot make a contribution, I think it's just absolute rubbish. The other thing is on the issue of as a way of really of a conclusion on this, because there are so many things that have been said. The issue of these new players taking up our assets, for example. I know the Russians have opened up, because of Russian investment in Central African Republic, they have even reached the point of where they have opened up police stations for themselves. I have seen this also in Zambia with the Chinese, where they opened up a police station for themselves. But the issue is then, why do we allow this? Why do our leaders allow this? Are we being sacrificed at the altar at the altar of cheap money? But then also the Chinese money is not cheap. Because the concessional loans, it's very difficult these days to get concessional loans of 1%, 3%, which normally would be given by multilateral institutions like IMF and World Bank. When we go to China, actually we get these loans at a commercial rate. So I really don't know how far we can go in terms of acquiring this debt or acquiring the debts, and how far we can pay this. We can pay this. But also fundamentally, and this is really my last issue, is why is it that has the democracy experiment failed? Because if we say the Europeans were here for a very long time, they colonized us, how can I allow myself now to be colonized by the Chinese? How can we allow ourselves to be colonized by the Chinese? Then there's a fundamental problem then with I normally argue and say, I think there's a problem with our skin. You are colonized by the Europeans and you didn't accept it. Then how can you now accept the Chinese colonization? I don't know. And I really don't have an answer to this. But where is it and where is what I read, the narrative that I see? I used to be a very big fan, by the way, of CGTN, African News. Every 8 p.m. they have a whole hour on African affairs. And their coverage is fantastic. I used to be a very big fan. Although, of course, now I know there are other TV stations like African News, which have even a better coverage than the CGTN. But the point here is, in all this, yes, we've had these new players, new, old, of course, new, old. But I think as Africans, we should not stand for to be recolonized. This is out of question, I think. But our leaders seem to have accepted the fact that they need to get this money. We are talking about the development narrative. We have abandoned the Washington consensus. Now we're in Beijing consensus. So I don't know. So Solomon, I don't have the answers. Possibly they lie with these people here. I don't know.
Very many questions, less answers. Raymond, you have the final say, then I can wrap it up.
So I'm a skeptic, and please don't stone me for the things I'm about to say. What is Africa? We're 54 different countries, millions of different tribes. Uganda and Rwanda don't agree the border from Rwanda is closed. The Kenyans don't want our chicken, they don't want our maize, they are blocking our milk. The Tanzanians are fighting the Burundians. The biggest population of Africa is in West Africa. They probably speak French and native languages. None of the East Africans speak it. The South Africans, who have the biggest control of the economy, do not consider themselves as Africans. So as North Africans, the Tunisians, the Algerians do not think that they belong to the African project. So I start my question by asking the African elite, what is this Africa that you speak of? Because it doesn't seem, our projection of what Africa is and what Africa actually is are separate entities. The colonial project, which we always blame for ruining Africa, lasted about 250 to 300 years in Africa. Self-governance before the colonial project and after the colonial project has been much longer than that. So there's also a crisis on African leadership. It's not just a crisis of the people colonizing us. And that's where we need to start by asking the questions. One, this Africa project we speak of, what is it? Can a young student from Tunisia come to Makerere, access an education, and get a job in Uganda? Is that possible in this lifetime? If it's not possible, then Project Africa itself is still something that's being defined. And the other question is the question of travel, because travel also has a lot to do with our identities. There are some African countries where, honestly, I'm invited to and I turn down. Tunisia, Libya. I have to fly to France to be able to come back to an African continent. And the question is really on, what are these barriers? If you say that we are one people, why can't I go to Rwanda right now? If you say we are one people, why can't I, who is natively from Toro, who is from a cattle herding generation, why can't I sell my milk in Kenya? Why is it being blocked by the Kenyan government? So the first fundamental is there is no existence of Africa. There is an impression created within the minds of the black people that there is something called Africa to which we belong. That impression hasn't been realized. So can we realize the impression before we create an aspiration for it? The second point is, in the creation of an aspiration for the young African elite, you must be open to the fact that there are civilizations which are way older than Africa, with much longer histories, and they could have dominion by virtue of their foreign policies on Africa. So you have to be open to the fact that you may not be colonized, but there may be actors who work within your country that you need to work with. And it's not just, today we are complaining about China colonizing Africa, but in 15,000 BC, Greece went and colonized half of South Asia. There was Portuguese conquest over the Chinese populations. There was Portuguese conquest over Africa. So if you roll this world about 2,500 years back, you realize that the Portuguese were the actors then. Today they are not actors. They are not even in this room. They're not having this conversation with us. So can Africa, if we realize this idea of Africa, can we then plan for, say, 1,000 years in which we can also come back in this room and have the French, the Germans, the British saying, we don't want an African conquest over us? Because we clearly see we have the numbers, we have the resources, we just lack the leadership. We just have, honestly, let's face it, we have a very bogus leadership. After 100 years of civilization that this education has created for our leaders, they are unable to just unpack basic state building. In Uganda, basic state building has failed. You don't have a functional state that's providing education, health. Imagine, basics, health and education. You can't educate your people, you can't feed them, you can't treat them. So are they your people? That's where the question of identity comes in. If someone feeds you and educates you and gives you a shelter, that person is your father, that person is your friend, that person is someone you can relate with. So as we question the colonial project, I also want us to question this leadership project over Africa, because the leaders we have today were the Marxists of yesterday, the Yoweri Musevenis, the Paul Kagames, Paul Biya's. Those are the leaders who created this idea of Africa can be a state. It can be one state. We can all natively work within this civilization. They failed to realize that. So perhaps for the young people in this room, you have a lot of time. That's the advantage that you have over old people. You can sit down now and wait it out. The people who are leading us today won't lead us 25 years from now. But what are you doing in these 25 years to build this level of civilization that if tomorrow one of us in this room happened to be the president of Uganda, how different would you treat the question of state building? How different would you treat the question of actors? How different would you relate with the US? How different would you relate with China?
Yeah.
And those are not things they teach you in school. Those are things you learn by civilizing yourself.
Ladies and gentlemen, Raymond Mujuni. We're talking about the West and the East, the old and the new. What happened to us? Is it time for us to start the discussion of Africentrism, Africanacity, Africa for us, by us, and with us? And Raymond is questioning the very existence of Africa. Maybe we need to start there. Maybe we need to start thinking about that. We are thinking of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. About 1.6 billion people having one market. Guess what? It was a struggle to get countries to sign. We were supposed to begin trading in January. We haven't yet started. Tanzania has not offered its tools to the African Union. But whilst we're even thinking about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, the East African Common Market Protocol, Raymond said we're struggling, having conversations with Rwanda. Kenya rejected Tanzania's products. They had 63 cases, and they've only resolved 42. And they're saying before they finish up everything, they have to sort everything right. Kenya rejected our milk, our maize, because they are thinking that we are importing our sugar from Brazil and repackaging it. Which is true. Maybe whilst we are discussing the issues around the new authoritarian regimes, the West, the East, maybe this is the opportunity for us to start thinking about us. maybe we need to start a conversation around Africanacity, Africa for us, by us. And maybe it's time for us to do that road plan that Raymond is saying, from now to 50 years on, what is going to happen to us as a continent? Good afternoon.
Another big round of applause for this wonderful, phenomenal, extreme panel.